Well, I must say, I've seen very different responses to this film, and I'm broadly in favour of it. I think that what it's attempting to do is to tell a complicated story that is both personal and political, and do it in a way that is very, very broad strokes. By Gurinder Chadha's, that's what she says at the beginning, I want to make a broad strokes movie that will appeal, that will have multiplex mainstream appeal. She's talked about, Gosford Park and Downton and all that sort of stuff as being sort of frames of reference, and looking at ways in which she can tell this story that will absolutely have mainstream appeal. And what she's done with her screenwriters is that she has essentially taken a take on this story, that has come from a book which is called The Shadow of the Great Game. And this basically, the thesis of it is that the story of partition actually is a story of a put-up job in terms of Mountbatten, that Mountbatten was sent there as a patsy. And in fact, there was a plan that was hatched by Churchill at the end of World War II that is underlying all of this. And as Gillian Anderson said in that interview, that he didn't know in advance what was going on. And then he only finds out sort of later on in the film that in fact he's being set up, he's kind of carrying the can for something else. And the book is Narendra Singh Sarila's The Shadow of the Great Game. And that's where that thesis comes from. Now, whether you agree with that thesis or not doesn't matter. That's the story of the film. What the film then proceeds to do is to tell that story with all the different characters that Gillian Anderson talked about in that interview, very much done in thumbnail sketches, very much done with declarative expository dialogue. People do definitely explain things conversationally, however. And whilst that's happening, you've got these two layers, this kind of upstairs, downstairs, that, as you said, you've got the, the Lord and Lady Mountbatten, and then you've got the story of this love affair between a Hindu boy and a Muslim girl. When somebody actually says Hindu boy and a Muslim, you can't possibly do that. You've got the story of the household being divided in a similar way that India is to be divided. And what Gurinder Chadha manages to do is to take those sort of larger details and turn them into something which is sort of small and domestic. There's a scene which has been talked about quite a lot in which they're having to divide up the household. Knives go one way, forks go one way, a tuba goes to India, a French horn goes to Pakistan. And then there's an argument about, well, if you're going to have Wuthering Heights, then we're going to have all of Jane Austen when they come to dividing up the library. And also, Gurinder Chadha has always had an eye for cheeky humour, and there is quite a lot of cheeky humour. It's worse than Glasgow on a Saturday night is a line which is reeled out. And I think that if there's a weakness in the film, I think there is that I think that the Romeo and Juliet romance is rather undercooked and rather underdeveloped. It feels like that at one point was the centre of the story, but the story has sort of shifted its focus. And I think that romance does get lost. I know that you were more charmed by that than I was. At the beginning, I thought that was going to be the prism through which you saw this story. In fact, as the movie goes on, it much more becomes all the various different elements of the household. I think that she's dealing with a period of history which is, as I said, very, very complicated. She has a particular line through it which the film argues with clarity. I remember thinking that I don't know whether you remember this, but she came on to talk about It's a Wonderful Afterlife, which is a film that I do remember that. And I didn't like that film at all. And I had a lot of correspondence afterwards from people saying the problem is that you didn't get a lot of the cultural references in that film. And it's a lot funnier if you do understand the cultural references in it. And the thing with Viceroy's House is it is a film which assumes that you know nothing and then proceeds to basically spoon-feed you the information. I have no problem with that. I had no problem with it at all because I found that in its dramatic storytelling, it told the story that it needed to tell in a way which made just as much sense as that film was able to make. Yes, there are very, very bold moments in it. There's the dividing India for oil moment. There's the thing that you talked about the
dividing India for
is a line.
It's a line to which Mountbatten goes, really?
And yes.
And I was sitting in the audience going, I don't think so. I don't think that's the main story. And it felt as though they were trying to crowbar a little bit of contemporary Iraq.
And you talked as well about the Brexit stuff, which is definitely, anything in which, you've got, we're rushing.
And the other thing is that, and Gillian Anderson just explained why they didn't do it. But the fact that Edwina Mountbatten is supposed to have this affair with the first Prime Minister of India, and really, and here they are in the same room, and there's no suggestion of that. And she says we didn't do that because we wouldn't have been allowed to tell the story.
And that has been the case in the past.
Yeah, well, that's kind of not good enough, is it, in terms of telling a story?
I have to confess that didn't bother me, because once it was apparent that the movie wasn't going to go there, it really didn't bother me, because it felt like the story did. Even if they did, because that didn't feel to me like what the story was about. So, as somebody who's a fan of Gurinder Chadha's movie making anyway, although there are films of hers that I have not liked, and It's a Wonderful Afterlife is a particularly good example of that, I went in thinking, okay, I know how this is going to go. I thought the poster looked grisly, and the poster made me sort of really expect the worst.
Why did
Because the poster just looks like a piece of heritage, post Downton, and also there's something to do with the airbrushing of the characters on the poster. The poster just looked terrible, in the same way as the poster for A Royal Affair looked terrible. I thought I wasn't going to like the film at all, but it engaged me. I found it increasingly worked on me emotionally. I did find the ending moving, because we find out during it, as the thing goes on, there's very, very sort of personal involvement. I thought it was a solid piece of filmmaking. I know that it has divided some people. I know that some people are very sniffy about it and think that it plays to the gallery. I don't agree. I think that
meaning
that essentially it's telling its story in very bold, very simple, very sort of expository terms, and I don't have a problem with that. I thought that it was a solid piece of movie making that managed to tell a complicated story, one particular version of a complicated story, in a way that worked dramatically, and I enjoyed it. Yes, I liked it.